Welcome to No Filter Doctor, where we cut through the health hype and dig into what's real, what works, and what's backed by evidence. I'm Dr. AK. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining me again. Today, we are going to talk about plant versus animal proteins. I understand there's a big debate out there, so I wanted to clear the air on some of the different qualities between these two proteins and talk about kind of nutritional content in terms of which one is, quote, better. Well, the answer is it depends. So we're going to go through the differences between them and help you figure out which protein is best for you. I am going to talk a little bit about protein quality and different sources, so hopefully this will clear things up in the end. If we're going to talk about the different kinds of proteins in terms of animals versus plant, we need to first cover what is a protein, and then we need to talk about amino acids. So proteins are molecules that are made by a combination of different amino acids, and they really are the cornerstone to the structure and function of our bodies. I mean, everything we do utilizes protein. Amino acids are organic compounds that contain both a carboxyl group, which is something made of a carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, and an amino group, which is made of nitrogen and hydrogen. There are 20 amino acids in total, and your body uses them in various combinations to build different kinds of proteins. Of the 20 amino acids, 9 of them are considered essential amino acids. This means that the human body cannot synthesize them, and they must come from a dietary source. Without adequate intake of the essential amino acids, our body can't effectively build and repair muscle tissue and perform all these other metabolic functions that are required. If you go to the show notes, I have a link to the blog that covers this topic, and in there is a chart of all 20 amino acids. I have it listed out whether they're essential or not. And then I have their key functions and contributions and what they do. So you can look at that chart to kind of get a more detailed breakdown of all of the amino acids. Now, if we go back to proteins and defining them, we also have to talk about complete versus incomplete proteins. And this is one of the huge differences when we talk about the debate of sources of protein. So a complete protein contains all 9 amino acids in sufficient quantities to support the body's needs. Now, most animal proteins fall into this category, so things like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy. They are all considered complete proteins. There are a few plant exceptions. Soy, quinoa, buckwheat, and amaranth are also complete plant sources of proteins. An incomplete protein, which I'm sure you figured out by now, is one that lacks one or more of the essential amino acids. And many of the plant proteins, except for the ones that I just listed, fall into this group because their amino acid profiles are limited. One example is grains are often low in lysine. Legumes have lysine, but they're typically low in methionine. And this is what kind of differentiates the whole complete versus incomplete protein. And this is what kind of feeds into this debate about animal versus plant proteins. One of the main issues is we can't store protein the same way that we store glucose and fat. So, we take a carbohydrate, we eat it, our body processes it, and that glucose is stored in the form of glycogen in skeletal muscles and in our liver. Fat, we all know about the storage of fat, right? So we can see where fat is stored. That's stored in adipose cells. We don't really have that pool to tap into of proteins. And so because of that, the traditional thinking has been that, if you want to eat a plant protein, that's totally fine, but you have to combine it with another complementary plant protein in every single meal. And that way, every single meal, you're getting the full complement of amino acids. And so we've learned that while there isn't this running depot of amino acids, every single meal doesn't have to have complementary plant proteins, but you do need to make sure that you eat them throughout the day. Okay, now that we've covered the basics, we can talk about protein quality and how it's measured. So we kind of talked about, not all proteins are created equal when it comes to their components and whether they're complete or incomplete. The same thing holds true when it comes to how well your body can digest, absorb, and use them. There are 2 scores that take these qualities into account and then apply scores to the proteins. The first score, get ready, there's a lot of words here, is the Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score. Yeah, like I said, lots of words. And so this is abbreviated as the PDCAAS. So if you are listening to other podcasts where they talk about different proteins and you hear them say the PDCAAS, this is what they're referring to. Proteins that have the full complement of essential amino acids that are also highly digestible are given a score of 100%. For example, casein, whey, milk, eggs, they all get a score of 100%. Plant proteins, however, almost never receive 100% with the exception of soy. Soy is also 100% PDCAAS. But putting soy aside, if we look at other plants like wheat gluten, okay, that has a PDCAAS of 25%. And the reason for that is it's tough to digest. So because of its low digestibility, it gets a lower score. There are issues that people take with the PDCAAS score, however, because while it does look at kind of that whole protein that you're eating and how easy it is to digest, it doesn't look at how well the amino acids are absorbed, right? So we eat something, it goes to our stomach, there's hydrochloric acid, some churning and burning going on. That food then moves into our small intestine where there are other enzymes that are added to it and break the food down, but that's also where a lot of absorption occurs, and some amino acids are a little bit tougher to absorb. So this other score, called the Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score, was created, and that is referred to as the DIAAS. That takes into account how well amino acids are also absorbed. This scoring system is a little bit challenging because there can be scores over 100. It's not as simple as the PDCAAS. So, milk and eggs, they're over 100 because they have the complete amino acid profile. Those amino acids are readily absorbed. The proteins are easily digested. Plant proteins tend to score lower than animal proteins when we are looking at the DIAAS system. But here's the problem with both of these scoring systems. Plant proteins in general are hard to digest, and that's because there is a lot of other nutrients and vitamins that are in plants. So if we talk about fiber, insoluble fiber is hard to digest, but we need insoluble fiber. I did a blog post on fiber. You can go ahead and read it, where I break down soluble and insoluble fiber. It is a huge health benefit, and yes, it is hard to digest. But because of that, these plants get a lower score, and then people approach them thinking, oh, it's a low score, so that means it's a bad food. It is not a bad food. It just means that they don't have the full complement of amino acids, or they're tougher to digest. So whenever you want to plan your meal out, you have to take all of this stuff into consideration to make sure that you are getting a balanced amino acid profile. So yes, these plants are scored lower on the PDCAAS or DIAAS scoring systems, but that, again, it does not mean they are bad foods. The other area where plant proteins take a big hit is when it comes to the amino acid leucine. Okay, we're going to get a little biochemical and molecular biology here, but I promise, as always, I will explain it in a way that it's not too science nerd geeky. Leucine is the key amino acid for muscle growth, and the way it works is through the mTOR pathway. So we want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, right? So we're eating foods, we're doing our resistance training, and we're trying to build muscle mass. That process of building muscle mass is called muscle protein synthesis. And the main pathway that's involved in that process is the mTOR pathway. Now, this is something that turns on cell signaling. And leucine is basically like the molecular on switch for that mTOR pathway. Some molecular biology research demonstrates that you need to hit a daily leucine threshold in order to stimulate the muscle protein synthesis through this mTOR pathway. And that threshold is going to vary based on someone's age, their sex, what their goals are in terms of their muscle mass. So I can't really give you this like standardized number for you to calculate your daily leucine threshold. But it's basically like you need to get the leucine in order to build your muscle mass. The reason why the plant proteins take a hit in this category is because they have lower leucine content. So, whey protein, we talked about that before. Whey protein is an excellent source of leucine, and you can easily hit a leucine threshold if you are taking whey protein. But you don't need to take that much. You can take kind of a standard serving and hit whatever you need for your leucine. Plant proteins such as rice or pea, you need way more of that in order to get the same amount of leucine content. Where the challenge is if you need to build muscle mass, which I would say all of us need to build muscle mass. Even those of us who have great muscle mass, you want to build those stores now because as we age, they're automatically going to decline. So we need to build our muscle mass, and it's really, really challenging to do that when you're just on a plant-based diet. Again, it's not a deal breaker. It just is more challenging, so you really have to be aware and plan your meals out in such a way to get this leucine content. All right, my vegan and vegetarian friends, worry not. I'm also going to cover the downsides of animal proteins because there are some, and if we're going to be fair, we need to discuss both sides of this coin so that you have all of the information moving forward. We talked about fiber. Guess what animal proteins have zero of? They have no fiber. Plants are the only source of fiber. So there's a downside to an animal protein. Another downside is saturated fat. With the exception of some of the tropical oils, things like coconut, palm kernel, and cocoa butter, there aren't a whole lot of saturated fats in plants. Now, those tropical oils are the exception. There is zero saturated fat animal protein. Now, there are different levels of saturated fats in different animal proteins. For example, boneless, skinless chicken breast has a relatively low amount of saturated fat. A lot of the different fish that are out there are a low source of saturated fat, but there are zero animal-based proteins with zero saturated fat. There's a whole lot of plant-based protein that have no saturated fat in them. There are also ethical and environmental considerations when we're talking about animal proteins. Globally, agriculture accounts anywhere from a quarter to a third of greenhouse gas emissions, depending on what source you look at. In the US, we're sitting at about 10%. And some of that comes from methane. And because I'm a child, I can't help but think that it's cows farting. I have 2 adolescent boys in my house, and so my mind immediately goes there. Putting cow farts to the side here, there's also a concern with water runoff from those fields that the animals are grazing in. There's an issue with nitrogen content in there, some of the other nutrients that are in the water, and some pathogen contamination. So this is another area of environmental concern when we're talking about animal proteins, right? We have to raise the animals in order to be able to eat them. And so those are some things that people consider when they are looking at animal protein versus plant protein. And it actually is part of the decision making when people choose to be vegan or vegetarian. People also have ethical concerns. They do not want to eat anything that had to be killed. Sustainability, ethics, the environment, these are all valid considerations when we are choosing what foods we want to eat. And obviously, when you take a step back and you look at the big picture, you can see here why there is not a single best protein source for everyone. And rather than debate about it, I think we just need to take a step back and ask a few questions so that we can each figure out which protein source may be best suited for us. What are your health and fitness goals? Is it muscle maintenance, muscle gain? Is it your metabolic health? Is it disease risk reduction? Because that is going to determine your protein source. Do you have any medical conditions that affect your dietary sources, such as problems with your lipids, any kidney disease? Do you have an elevated LPA or elevated LDL? Do you have any ethical or environmental considerations that are guiding your decisions in your diet? And how much effort are you really willing to put into planning complementary proteins if you choose a plant-based diet? And I can't answer these for you. I can use myself as an example, however. I found out that I have an insanely high Lp(a). So that's lipoprotein A for those of you who are not aware of what this molecule is. And mine is so high that it puts me at the same category of risk for cardiovascular disease as people who have familial hypercholesterolemia. And the part that really sucks about having a high Lpa, well, this is all genetic, and there's absolutely nothing I can do to lower it. No amount of eating or exercise or anything is going to change my Lp(a). But what I can do is lower my other risk factors. So the way I describe this is, imagine you're holding a basket that has all of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease in it. Things like smoking, obesity, high cholesterol, elevated Lp(a), all of the different things that are in that basket. What I need to do is empty out everything from that basket that I have control over, because no matter what, in the end, that high Lp(a) is still chilling in that basket. I already don't smoke. I already exercise. So I need to lower a lot of the fat-containing foods that I'm eating. As a result, I've had to dump out the high saturated fat-containing animal proteins. Ribeye used to be a pretty nice treat that we would have in our house. We no longer eat ribeye. I think my husband and kids probably do when I'm out of town and traveling and giving talks, but when I'm here, we don't. We do a lot of chicken breasts. We do a lot of fish. We will do lean proteins. We've also started adding a ton of plant-based proteins to our diet. So what was once a salad that had just vegetables is now a salad that has some quinoa in it and has some kind of bean, whether it's a black bean or a chickpea. And you may ask, well, why not just completely eliminate animal-based proteins? And that's because I'm still trying to put on muscle mass. I know that going into my 50s, 60s, and 70s, my muscle mass is going to decline over time. It naturally will. It does for everyone. And while I can't stop that from happening, I can change the slope at which that happens. And so I need to consume animal proteins to help give me the leucine that I need to build that muscle mass. And quite frankly, I am just way too lazy to plan out what a plant-only protein would look like in terms of meal planning throughout the day. For some people, it's not an issue at all. They're happy to do that planning, and props to them. For me, I don't want to deal with it. And again, this is why there is no best protein. You really have to look at your goals, how you're willing to plan, what are some of the other health issues that are going on when you want to choose what your diet looks like. The truth is, even with taking in animal proteins, I still don't get the 2 grams per kilo per day that I'm shooting for in order to put on muscle mass. I have to supplement with whey protein. If I were a lifestyle medicine purist, I would not do any supplements. I would really reduce the amount of animal proteins that I was eating, and I would do all of the planning for a plant-based protein diet. But I'm not a purist. I'm a realist. Life is busy. Between helping manage this household, raising children, running a medical practice, doing the blogs and the podcasts, trying to take care of my own health, and everything else that's going on in life, I just don't have the time to be a purist, and I'm okay with that. Somebody else, this may be 100% up their alley, and they may be able to do it. The bottom line is the plant versus animal protein debate should not be a plant versus animal protein debate. It should be, what are your goals, and how can you achieve the essential amino acids that you need in order to nourish yourself while meeting your goals. I genuinely hope now that you know about the different proteins, the amino acids, the different scoring systems, and know about the leucine threshold, you have the information that you need to sit down with your healthcare team and determine which protein source is best for you. It may be one, it may be both, but it's going to be what's best for you. And that's not necessarily what's the best for me or anyone else. Thank you so much for joining me this week on No Filter Doctor. What you do need to keep in mind is that while I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. So anything that we discuss on this podcast is not medical advice. And listening to this podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. The purpose of this podcast is for information purposes only. Any questions or decisions that you want to make about your healthcare should be discussed with your doctor or other healthcare provider. Making healthcare decisions without discussing it first with your doctor or other healthcare provider is done so at your own risk.